On the night of June 16, 1462, Sultan Mehmed II, the ruler of the Ottoman Empire, was asleep in his tent on the outskirts of Targovište, the capital city of Wallachia. While the Sultan slept, an army of around 10,000 Wallachian soldiers entered the camp. Their mission was to assassinate Mehmed and throw the Ottoman Empire into turmoil. But in a twist of fate, the Wallachian soldiers attacked the wrong tent, sparing the Sultan's life. Despite the attempt on his life, Mehmed continued his march to the capital, and on the 21st of June, the Ottomans found something truly horrifying. In the fields outside the city were 23,844 Turkish prisoners impaled on wooden stakes. It was a sight that has since been called the Forest of the Impaled, and the stench of rotting flesh was enough to shock the Sultan into retreat. So who was the Wallachian prince who had his men impale tens of thousands of Turks? That was none other than Vlad Dracula III, and according to popular belief, he was the inspiration for one of horror's most iconic monsters. In the summer of 1890, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker took a holiday in the town of Whitby on the coast of northern England. During this time, he was already hard at work on a new novel, a horror tale about a vampire called Count Vampire. While visiting a library in Whitby, Stoker came across a book of Wallachian history called An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. In it, he found a footnote referring to Vlad III. But it wasn't Vlad's history of impalement and torture that caught his attention. It was his last name, Dracula. After Stoker left the library, his vampire, Count Vampire, was no more. From that day forward, he would be known only as Count Dracula. So, did Vlad the Impaler inspire the creation of Dracula, or is the connection just a name and nothing more? In the novel, there are a couple of passages that help answer this question. Who was it but one of my own race who, as voivoda, crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula, indeed. What was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them? In this scene, Dracula's telling Jonathan Harker about his family's history, and it happens to align perfectly with Vlad III. Vlad was voivoda of Wallachia, voivoda meaning ruler or warlord. It's also true that Vlad crossed the Danube into Bulgaria and fought the Turks in their own territory. Even the line about his brother is true. Vlad did have a younger brother named Radu, or Radu the Handsome, and he allied himself with the Ottomans in exchange for being made ruler of Wallachia if Vlad III happened to be forced out. So it seems from the text that Dracula is Vlad III, right? Well, the problem lies in the first line of the passage, who was it but one of my own race? Does this mean that Dracula isn't Vlad III, but maybe a relative or distant descendant? In a later monologue by Van Helsing, we get the answer. He must indeed have been that voivoda Dracula who won his name against the Turk over the great river on the very frontier of Turkeyland. If it be so, then was he no common man, for in that time and for centuries after, he was spoken of as the cleverest and most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest. These passages together make it clear that Dracula is in fact Vlad III, but there's still one big problem. Outside these two passages, there's no evidence to suggest that the character of Dracula was based on Vlad the Impaler. Keep in mind that by the time Bram Stoker discovered the name Dracula, he had already begun writing his story. With that said, it's more likely that Stoker found general information about Vlad and copy-pasted these stories to add depth to his character. So the question remains, if Dracula isn't based on Vlad III, who inspired the monster we know today? most scholars believe that Dracula was influenced by a variety of sources. After all, Stoker was a late Victorian writer, and like most writers, he drew a ton of inspiration from the contemporary writers of his time. For example, Dracula's polite and aristocratic nature was likely inspired by the aristocratic Lord Ruthven in William Polidori's The Vampire. Dracula's mistresses, as well as Lucy Westenra's vampiric form, were likely inspired by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's vampire, Carmilla. There are even suggestions that the story of Elizabeth Bathory, a brutal serial killer in the late 16th century who was known for bathing in the blood of her victims, inspired Dracula's bloodlust and murderous activities. Though I should mention this last claim about Elizabeth Bathory is still heavily disputed by scholars, so take it with a grain of salt. But there is one person that most scholars agree was the inspiration for Dracula. It was Bram Stoker's own friend and colleague, the English stage actor Henry Irving. I'll read you a physical description of Dracula from the book, and you tell me this isn't the guy we're talking about. His face was strong, very strong, aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiar arched nostrils, with loftily domed forehead and hair growing scantily around the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel looking. Now look, I'm not saying Dracula isn't Vlad III, and I'm also not saying that Dracula is meant to be any of these other people, but this does challenge the common belief that Bram Stoker based his monster on Vlad the Impaler. Clearly Stoker was aware of who Vlad was, there's really no question about that, but does that mean that Dracula is based entirely on Vlad III? It's possible, but very unlikely. Personally, I think that Bram Stoker already had his vampire written down when he discovered the real Dracula and thought the stories of war and impalement were, to put it bluntly, fucking awesome. So what did he do? I mean, well, like any great writer, he put the stories in his book. One of my favorite vampire movies, and I mean favorite of all time, is Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that movie begins by telling us that Dracula was Vlad III. And honestly, I think it made the movie pretty badass. It added an element to Dracula that almost makes you feel sorry for him. It humanizes him and makes him less of a monster. Also, by the way, Vlad III's wife did actually kill herself by leaping from Vlad's castle into the icy river below, so good on Francis Ford Coppola for doing his research. Now look, at the end of the day, this is all still up for debate, but I want to know what you think. Is Dracula Vlad III the ruthless leader of the Wallachians who impaled thousands of Turks, or is he a conglomeration of sources, a Frankenstein of Victorian literature and ancient folklore? Let me know in the comments what you think. And remember, vampires can't come in unless you invite them.